Hi, good day from Antique Toys. My name's Ed Sanford. We're going to do a presentation, a high-level presentation on fun stuff, action figures. We're going to talk about where they started, where they ended up, and have a quick overview of a couple of brands. So stay tuned for more. All right, so let's get into it. We've got a George Brown milk wagon. This would be early, I should say late 1800s, like 1880, 1890, for milk. Look, we have an action figure built into the horse-drawn toy. And at this day of age, they did it welded in or brazed in or soldered in, depending on how you want to say it. And it was static, so there wasn't much to talk about. So consider this the beginning. All right, and then we jumped over to cast iron. The cast iron figures, arguably they're different forms of toys for different needs, but I just kind of wanted to cover the loose figure / loose action figure. Gray iron did these. You went from static to static three-dimensional. A lot of the tin figures were snipped and they're very thin, as you could see. But the gray iron figure here with the soldier, with the officer, it's really substantial, pretty darn hefty and durable. The kids would play with it. And you had kind of a World War I theme where, you know, doughboy machine gunners. And that was a great start. Just as an aside, I put in a couple of recastings. This one's a exact recasting, but it's solid and it's a heavier lead. This would be the machine gunner within the Barclay series, which was considered a really nice toy. The toy would hinge. Then they decided figures needed to be maybe a little bit more cost effective. And so they started putting holes on them, like this particular Barclay piece, to lighten them up to make them cheaper. And this one also is hollow cast. And then you get into pod feet, they called it, where they took, instead of having a big cast iron base, cast iron was pretty expensive to make, they switched over to bigger bases like such of lead, which lead was easier to work. And then the evolution was they switched over to pod feet, which is kind of interesting, where it's the bare minimum. It's not quite as stable, but it still gets the job done. And then they decided potentially size, an increase in size would make sense. So the hollow cast Barclay jumped a bit in size. This is, I think, what they call a pot helmet. More of a Korean War style. And then overseas, you might say that there's an independent development. I mean, of course, European lead figures have been around, so the Americans didn't have a monopoly, but with more of an American-centric point of view, Britons came over, and the base was a cast metal on this particular model, and then the upper was lead. But these were smaller, but more refined, which is kind of typical for European toys. And then, of course, the king of toys, Marx, stepped in and said, oh, geez, let's outdo these guys, but let's make it of a cheaper material. So this is like a vinyl rubber / plastic, and it was hand painted, where you might say it has more detail. So Marx really raised the game quite a bit. On kind of a comic level, there were some experiments with hinged figures and such. Rice Krispies Premium, this would be 70s. And then the evolution, frankly, jumped over to what we know as 80s action figures. You get these guys with bendable joints and punching action and so forth. So small to large, heavy to lighter and more hollow, to eventually plastic and vinyl. away from iron and more towards petroleum-based products. So there you have it. We've got an interesting high level, albeit not close to being exhaustive point of view, but a point of view of how figures and toy people evolved, or toy representations of animation evolved. We started flat, three-dimensional. We jumped over to cast iron, which was really nice and elegant, but pretty expensive. We then jumped over to hollow figures of lead. Got to be more refined, but then jumped over to plastics, vinyls, and then eventually slightly larger point of articulation figures from the 80s. So cheers from Ed over at Antique Toys. Have some fun with your toy hunting. Drop us a line at toys@AntiqueToys.com, and please be sure to keep us in mind for your toy collections. We're happy to adopt out. Please be sure to check out the links below and take care. Cheers from Ed.